Well met. This is the fourth part of my four-part series on what I think to be issues in contemporary Warcraft lore. If you want the full introduction, you can go watch the introduction section in episode 1. Link in the description. The main thing to note is that you will occasionally see numbers in brackets in the corner of the video, like so. These are citation numbers for when I make claims that I feel should be backed up with a source. You can find the citation in question in the description by the corresponding number. If you'd prefer to read instead of watch, I will also be posting this series in text format on my website. Link in the description. This episode, which of all of them is by far the most important to me personally, concerns the moral dimensions of the Warcraft universe, and how I think they may have gone terribly awry in recent years. In an interview given during Blizzconline in 2021, Steve Denuser, who at the time was the lead narrative designer for World of Warcraft, said, "The thing to keep in mind is that these forces, whether it be light or order from the Titans or shadow, characters in our world tend to ascribe good and evil motivations to these things, but really those powers don't care about morality. They are driven to do what their nature is. And so, the nature of the Titans is to impose order on things. If you are on that program, helping them accomplish that goal, then they will be benevolent towards you and they will help and guide you. Perhaps we'll learn what will happen if you aren't someone who agrees with their agendas. The same could be said of the light. What happens when Illidan didn't go along with Xera's plan? Even, for example, in Visions of N'Zoth, when you think about the things N'Zoth was saying, he wasn't like, serve my evil will. He was like, I can make you stronger. I can help you. There's a bunch of bad stuff out there. You should be joining me and letting me help you do these things. You could say, was he lying to me? Well, part of it probably was, but there's truth in it too. These things exist beyond the morality we as mortals think of. This is the topic of the episode. The idea that the Warcraft cosmos, including its long-established heroes and forces of good, is amoral at best and immoral at worst. Now, perhaps that sounds like a not very impactful detail to the gentle viewer, especially if your interests in Warcraft are elsewhere. But in that case, I ask for the gentle viewer's patience and assure you that I will argue in the section after this one why I think this concerns everyone interested in Warcraft lore. Indeed, if you're particularly skeptical about your interest in this topic, feel free to skip to the next section already. But all that aside, I must confess I am not entirely certain what this statement from Morgard, that is, Steve, means. If his point was that all beings associated with such a cosmic force have no sense of right and wrong and merely pursue their agenda, then, and I should mention that the following examples are all deliberately from the Shadowlands and onwards, as those are the most contemporaneous with this statement. Why, in the Shadowlands expansion, did the other Eternal Ones fight against Zovaal, when his stated purpose was specifically to make capital D death supreme in the cosmos? Why did the Winter Queen give Arelon the option of rebelling against her decree, simply on the basis that his heart is pure? Why did the Primus want to restore honor to the Necrolords? Or why did he condemn Zovaal's malevolence? Indeed, in the dungeon journal entry for the prototype Pantheon encounter in the Sepulchre of the First One's raid, it specifically says that such cosmic beings, like the Eternal Ones, are capable of more than just their base directives, and capable of things like mercy and compassion. Similarly, in the lead-up to the Dragonflight expansion, commenting on the new lore of the Titanforged infusing dragon eggs with their magic, Steve, and I should say I am a fan of his, all this is not meant to badmouth my boy Morgard personally, gave a fairly lengthy reply where he explained the Titan-forged perspective on it and explicitly stated that their motivations need not be looked at in a sinister light. But surely if the Titans and their progeny only care about advancing capital O order, Steve could have just said well, they don't really give a damn. And why would Keeper Tyr, even in his, in my opinion, distinctly less noble Dragonflight characterization, be moved to tears, no pun intended, in addressing his friends one last time? Surely if he has zero attachment to anything except propagating order, he wouldn't, have much of an emotional life. And even in the context of that original statement in the interview, if his point was that such beings are all equally callous, then why would he cite N'Zoth's sincerity in its offers to us? Surely capital S shadow creatures would be just as untrustworthy as all the rest. And in Zereth Mortis, that one oracle, in what I should think is narrative foreshadowing, refers to how these 6 forces need to be brought together to harmony. But surely if they have no will besides executing their opposing natures, that could not be. This is an incomplete list, and of course it doesn't include any of the countless contrary examples of cosmic morality predating Shadowlands, but that is because I imagine that the narrative team does not, at present, feel bound by them. For more details, refer to episodes 2 and 3 of this series. But on the other hand, if his point wasn't that all such beings associated with cosmic powers are callous and care only about their personal agenda, then why did he specifically mention beings like the Titans and Zira and stuff? Now, as the gentle viewer may surmise, this is a topic that I've thought long and hard about. But this is not, as such, the point of the video, so to summarize, I am confident, although not certain beyond any uncertainty, that Steve's point there was that the 6 forces themselves, light, life, disorder, and so on, are amoral in the same way that, say, gravity is amoral. And do note that in his response there, Steve does begin it specifically by referring to these forces and not to their respective beings. And that beings associated with these forces, like for example the Void Lords, Titan-forged, and demons, are capable of both good and bad. Hence his example of how Zira was capable of doing bad things, and N'Zoth was capable of doing good things. Of course, given all the contradictions I listed, and others, many of them dating from after that interview, it is possible that Steve's statement was just an at-the-time plan of the narrative teams, and something they ended up not going forward with. At least in that form. Mother Moon knows I hope it's so. The critique in this video, however, argues against both the ideas of having the forces and their beings as being, evil, or at least monstrously callous. This is because I think the topics are quite closely linked. And because, though, as said, I don't think Blizzard means to have them as unambiguously antagonistic as that, they certainly have made overtures to that direction. For example, the Titans, some of the Warcraft universe's greatest heroes since Warcraft 3, now look to be the, if my hunch is right, light knows I hope it isn't, final villains of the, at the time of saying this, upcoming World Source Saga series of expansions. Similarly, Shadowlands shows the Naaru and the Light not as the manifestation of goodness and benevolence in the Warcraft universe, but as an ominous cabal of vindictive fanatics. Therefore, I think there is definitely room to argue against this recharacterization of previous forces of good. And one final note before we move on. If the intention is that these things are all completely amoral, some might argue that it is incorrect to call them evil. My counter-argument is that if demonstrably free-willed, sapient creatures want to subjugate the whole universe under their particular flavor of tyranny, and have zero scruples about their means or the suffering they cause, then yes, evil is an appropriate term. One of the greatest glories of the Warcraft universe is its diversity. This also leads to the fact that individuals' interests in it are not necessarily spread evenly. That is to say, different people can, and do, care more or less about different things. For example, someone can be a huge Tauren fan and know what the right eye of the Earth Mother is called, while another person can be interested in all of Warcraft except Tauren. Someone can be interested exclusively in Quel'Thalas and its peoples, to the exclusion of all else. Someone only cares about warlocky, demony, legiony, felly stuff, while someone else is equally interested in everything. Someone loves the ethereals and Sholazar Basin above all else. Someone is only in it for the big cosmos-sweeping events and is bored to death of more terrestrial expansions, while someone else doesn't care about anything that doesn't take place in the Eastern Kingdoms or Kalimdor. Someone is obsessed with dwarves above all else, and someone else wishes we could have an entire expansion around the Shadowpan. Someone is an actual devotee of the Void IRL. I know a couple of people like that. And so on and so on. And it is glorious. It is a reflection of the superb richness of the Warcraft universe. And of the richness of spirit of those who call it home. But despite this diversity of both universe and areas of interest, I would argue that it is still possible for individual creative decisions to impact everyone interested in the Warcraft universe, regardless of what they are or aren't interested in it. In this specific case, I argue that the retcon on the nature of the cosmos touches everyone, even if one has zero interest in the matter. The reason for this is a theme that those who have watched other episodes of this series may be sick of hearing about by now, but it still fits here. Contextualization. Now, this analogy I am about to give is going to drag on for a moment or few, so if you just want me to get to the point, feel free to skip to the timestamp indicated on the screen. One John Tolkien's Silmarillion begins with the account of the creation of the universe. In it, Eru, also known as Ilúvatar, who, it is important to note, is not just a fictional deity, but to Tolkien, who, as many watching this may know, was a devout Catholic Christian, rather a fictional representation of the real one, creates the angelic Ainur, who then, under his instructions, weave a great music that begets the universe. But one among the Ainur, Melkor, attempts to seize control of the music to increase the power and glory of the part assigned to himself. And for a while it seems as though he will succeed. But eventually, Eru brings an end to the music. In one chord, deeper than the abyss, higher than the firmament, piercing as the light of the eye of Ilúvatar. But Melkor's tarnishing of the music is not undone, and in consequence, creation is, at a metaphysical, fundamental, base level, marred. Evil is introduced into the world, and it is an inseparable part of the world. It can be fought and diminished, but it cannot be extirpated, save by Eru alone. All evil, all wrong, all suffering stems ultimately from this. But Eru says to Melkor, "And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument, in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined. Eru, as said, is God, and therefore no rebellion against him can ultimately succeed. And as he tells Melkor, even free-willed evil, however monstrous in scale or action, ultimately serves to bring about good. Things more wonderful, which the evildoer themselves has not imagined. After the very beginning, Eru only appears once, quite briefly, in the published Silmarillion. If memory serves, he isn't even mentioned in the Lord of the Rings. Melkor's metaphysical marring of creation is not explicitly discussed in the published Silmarillion, although Tolkien did write a lot of material on the subject. And again, not mentioned at all in the Lord of the Rings. And I'm not even gonna mention The Hobbit. But all the same, for all that lack of an explicit day-to-day presence, I do not believe that one could successfully argue that these things do not fundamentally contextualize everything in Tolkien's universe. The juxtaposition between the innateness and inescapability of evil and its ultimate impotence in the face of an omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, omnipresent God is part of absolutely everything in Tolkien's world. Every character, every place, every thing, every story. And so it is with Warcraft and its cosmos. The nature of its constituent powers and beings, good or evil, one note or not, moral or amoral, contextualizes, as the Marring and Eru do in Tolkien's world, the whole universe, and all the things and deeds within it. And how could it not? It is not all the same for the nature and character of the Warcraft universe, whether there exists the void that is the primordial evil that means to devour the cosmos, or whether there exists the void that is just one mindless force among many, or whether life itself, as originally described, promotes growth and renewal in all things, or is in fact rapacious and wants to strangle every world in its vines. And so on. And unlike in Tolkien's world, these are frequently explicit topics in Warcraft. Not mere crucial background information, but oftentimes crucial foreground information. And that, no matter how personally interested one is in the topic, is why this matters for Warcraft. As I mentioned in section 4 of episode 3, the Warcraft universe is a heroic one. By which I mean that heroism, by which I mean here valor and nobility in the face of peril, is an intrinsic, inseparable part of it. And likewise, and inseparable from it, it is a moral universe. By which I mean that right and wrong and people's interactions with these are similarly an intrinsic and inseparable part of Warcraft. Now, both of these points could strike one as very abstract and academically philosophical, but they're not just that. These are things experienced by people whenever, for example, they think their raid looks awesome executing a mechanic together, or whenever they hope that some faction gets their comeuppance, or whenever they feel that they can relate to some character's personal struggles, and so on. I should also mention that by heroic and moral, I do not mean that the Warcraft universe is one giant morality play, or that virtue always wins the day, or that every situation is a heroic battle between good and evil. That is only the case when I'm fighting in AV, or even that the forces of good, so to say, are infallible, morally or otherwise. What I mean is that even in cases where these aspects are less explicit, they are still present, because they are part of Warcraft's base makeup. The Battle of Dazar'alor, for example, was hardly good versus evil, but even there, both the Alliance and the Horde, rightfully, felt that their respective causes were righteous. And this, the presence of these aspects, is even true when everyone involved is, well, evil. Up until recently at least, both the Void and the Burning Legion have been forces of evil and enemies to each other. But even in their respective battles between two villains, the moral dimensions of Warcraft have come through. After all, the existence of evil also indirectly, by contrast, shows the existence of good. And historically, a crucial element, I think, in all these moral dimensions and their universal relevance to all things Warcraft has been their expression on a cosmic scale. Through things like the light or wild gods like Cenarius. Right and wrong are not just abstract concepts applied to the actions of mortals by other mortals, but also woven into the fabric of existence itself, palpably expressed across the breadth of creation, through things like demons ravaging mortal civilizations across the cosmos, or Agramar pausing his quest to save Draenor from the Evergrowth. And yet these things are not just removed far-off vistas of events among distant stars, but seen also upon our familiar Azeroth, in scales both great and small. The High Father ripping Y'Shaarj from Azeroth's very crust. The Burning Legion subjecting Suramar and its people to government-enforced tyranny. Arthas Menethil crying over the body of his wounded friend in a frozen cave in the ass end of Northrend, and finding that, after all he had done, the light still answered him, that it was still not too late to turn back from his course. The Twilight's Hammer taking advantage of the trauma of those who had survived the Third War to induct them into the cult. Elune saving a repentant, selfless satyr from death, and cleansing him of his cursed state. It is this extraordinary scale, depth and breadth, of the moral drama of the Warcraft universe that has, maybe I'm betraying my own ignorance here, but of the creative works that I know of, no superior, and goes a long way to making it, Warcraft, the marvel it is. I should also say that all of this does not mean, as I also mentioned just a bit earlier, that even the forces of good, so to say, are infallible, morally or otherwise. The Pantheon, as I stated in Section 2, have, until recently, been some of Warcraft's greatest heroes, but simultaneously one of Warcraft's greatest villains. Sargeras is also a titan. Magni's a good guy, but his former sexism for years cost him his beloved daughter. The Venthyr have virtue like the Accuser, but also debauchery like the Lord Chamberlain, and so on. The good in Warcraft have not been, are not, and in my opinion should not be, infallible, morally or in judgment. There is no Eru in Warcraft. What I am advocating for here is that they should continue to be possessed of fallible moral excellence. But if all these forces and beings are, instead, at best, callous, this all falls apart. Right and wrong are no longer, as I put it earlier, woven into the fabric of existence itself. The conflicts across the cosmos, in scales small and great, are no longer between heroes, villains, and things in between, but just different flavors of monsters. Azeroth, and every mortal world besides, is not one realm of wonders among countless, but rather an island, surrounded by a malevolent, destructive, corruptive, covetous universe. Good, in this model, exists only in mortals, and even then, not indefinitely. Eventually, special circumstances notwithstanding, they will die, be taken to the Shadowlands, and there become creatures of capital D death, Kyrian and Necrolords and the like, and become one of the types of monsters and tyrants battling for dominance over creation. Righteousness lost, dedicated but to advancing the agenda of their specific power. What the nature of a fictional universe like Warcraft is like is a topic where it's quite possible for people to have different ideas. But I do not believe I am alone when I say that that is not Warcraft. I should also make clear that I have nothing against grim, even existentially grim fictional universes. I'm a fan of 40k, you know. I am merely saying that such a tone does not fit with Warcraft. I also do not believe, if this retcon has indeed been made, that existential grimness is an actual goal of the narrative teams. But I do believe it would be its unavoidable consequence, particularly when combined with the aforementioned new Shadowlands introduced lore of how afterlives work. Usually, in these videos, as those who have watched other episodes can attest, when I criticize some creative decision of the story teams, I follow it up by a few examples of what I think to be the negative consequences of that decision. But in this case, if this retcon is indeed a thing, I believe the topic to be so severe that it warrants its own entire section. Because from what I have seen, from my imperfect perspective, I do not believe that either the narrative team or the lore community at large fully appreciates the narrative consequences and magnitude of this potential change. Because if all the powers of the cosmos are equally evil, then what is the emotional or thematic impact of Sargeras' fall? He wasn't overwhelmed by despair stemming from his love of life. All that happened was that he switched from one kind of evil, order, to another, disorder. Or why should anyone have any kind of emotional response to the finale of the Burning Crusade expansion if it wasn't the glorious redemption of a people from evil and despair? The, to quote Tolkien again, eucatastrophe of not only the whole expansion, but of the Quel'Thala's and Blood Elf storyline which began in Warcraft 3. But instead, just a move in a cosmic game of realpolitik. Of the Naaru outplaying the Legion. In fact, let's recap. Under this possible new model of the Warcraft universe, the Sunwell got started as a fount of evil power. Arcane magic, so order. Until it was corrupted by another kind of evil power, death, before being cleansed by a third kind of evil power, light, allowing the people of Quel'Thalas to free themselves from a dependency on a fourth kind of evil power, disorder. Art is subjective and all, but personally I think I prefer the original version. And what about the backstory of the Draenei? Their history wouldn't be one of principled self-exile, of millennia enduring hope and faith even in the face of impossible odds, of the, to quote their Cataclysm era intro cinematic, undying strength of their convictions. What exactly is the narrative or thematic point when the thing the Draenei put their faith and lot in, the light, is not any less evil than the thing they escaped from, disorder? There was no grand universe-spanning drama. All that happened was that the remaining Eredar became Sargeras' stooges, and the Draenei became the Naarus. And never mind broader story beats, what about individual player choices? For example, I imagine that a significant portion of people who main Paladin do so because they love the thematicism of the class. They want to play as holy knights. But if the light is just as callous and ruinous as every other power, then there's nothing holy about paladins. They're shiny and glowy, but there is no practical or thematic difference between, say, a warlock conjuring hellfire and a paladin blessing someone. Both are applications of a malevolent and corruptive power in the pursuit of one's own ends. The Emerald Nightmare. Cenarius says this at the end of the eponymous raid.
Heroes, champions, step forth and hear me. The Nightmare has long been a cancer eager to consume the Emerald Dream. Had Xavier succeeded, his corruption would have overwhelmed Azeroth, giving rise to a living nightmare. Your triumph restores the dream and safeguards your world. The allies of Xavier's will never relent, but this road at least is closed to them. To honor your courage, I offer passage into the pure heart of the dream. As you feel the essence of life blooming beneath your feet, know that it endures thanks to what you achieve this day.
This used to be the catharsis at the end of years of struggle and sacrifice against corruption and suffering and nightmares. The long battle against the Emerald Nightmare. The thematic culmination, one might say, of Ysera's statement of how
every dream has its nightmare, and every nightmare has an end.
But with this potential new model, what emotional or even narrative impact does this speech and moment have? We banished one kind of evil power, shadow, but all that did was return to the dream the dominance of its original evil power, life. Indeed, Cenarius himself is a wild god, a creature of life. Combined with the modern practice of unreliable narrator, for more information, see episode 3, and the notion of all cosmic powers being equally untrustworthy, is there any reason to regard this speech as anything but just a victor's propaganda? Or Bridenbrand. Now, to those who do not know, Crusader Bridenbrand is a character and an associated quest chain created in honor of a Blizzard developer's brother who died of cancer. The quest chain involves helping an Argent Crusader who is dying from the Scourge's plague of undeath. Though the player travels far and wide and seeks the help of many powerful beings, they are ultimately unsuccessful, and Bridenbrand succumbs, grateful but doomed, to his affliction. But Adal themselves, along with 2 other naaru, appear, saying that the light does not abandon its champions. The naaru could not heal him, but they accept his spirit, delivering him from the fate of rising as an enslaved servant of the Lich King. And Adal states that Bridenbrand shall taste only paradise. As Warcraft Wiki's page for Crusader Bridenbrand studiously notes, many have found, for understandable reasons, I think, the questline one of WoW's most touching. And during the cluster of interviews that popped up in the lead up to the Shadowlands expansion, Steve Denuser went out of his way in one of them to affirm that yes, Bridenbrand went to the light, not the Shadowlands. But if all such forces are equally bad, then there is no thematic or practical difference to being embraced by the light or being claimed by death, or by any other force. The realm of the light would be just as inimical to righteousness as all the rest. there would be no paradise for Bridenbrand. Or the end of the Legion expansion, and Taurus, the Pantheon, the imprisoning of Sargeras. We stop a cosmic army of evil and imprison its leader, but also free the leaders of another cosmic army of evil. The Burning Legion wants to destroy all worlds, and the Titans want to subjugate them all. Really, with this proposed retcon, we didn't accomplish that much. We didn't so much defeat evil as switch it to a different flavor and postpone it. And to top it all off, to remind us of this half victory, half defeat, we get the Red Star. Reminding us of the doom we unleashed, both on ourselves and all of creation. That's quite the deflation of what used to be a victory beyond victories. The deliverance of the Makers themselves and all creation. Or Ursog, being a wild god, if he was not a noble guardian of Azeroth and her wilds, but rather an uncaring, moralless being whose only concern was advancing the agenda of life, no matter the cost, then the Afterlives Ardenweald episode loses most all of its emotional content. There was nothing heart-wrenching about Ursog's final death. If anything, this way, the cosmos has one malignant creature less. I don't see what Arelon's so upset about. Or the whole story of the Argent Dawn and Crusade and the Plaguelands post-Scourging of Lordaeron. If the light is no less evil than the forces of the Scourge, then what does that make of those storylines? Light's Hope Chapel and groups like the Argent Dawn or the Brotherhood of the Light and all others fighting a basically unwinnable war to save once fair Lordaeron and to stand against the tide of the Scourge would no longer be defiant spots of light in a sea of darkness, but rather just duped minions of one ruthless cosmic power, the light, fighting against the minions of another ruthless cosmic power, death. Or more recently, Prince Renathal. He was never immortal, but rather created straight by Denathrius, so he's as purely capital D death as they come. In that light, if this retcon is a thing, then his character, and indeed the whole Sinful Rebellion and the whole storyline of the Venthia Covenant and Revendreth becomes... I'm not even sure, to be honest. But if beings associated with cosmic powers, like Venthir, care not one whit about right or wrong, and only want to advance their agenda, then the rebellion against Denathrius was not, could not be, about principles, about the noble few not fallen into debauchery, who still remember their sacred mission of redemption, but rather it was just a military action to unseat the current administration, in whose efficacy they were dissatisfied in. Unfortunately, one could keep going with these examples. This retcon, if enacted, or if it has indeed already been enacted, would, I believe it is justified to say, unravel vast swathes of Warcraft storytelling across games and books and patches and decades. It is not that no past event can ever be narratively subverted, or that such subversion should be inherently avoided for fear of upsetting people. But when a single creative decision would uproot aspects of a universe that have existed practically for as long as it has, would rob characters and moments and places and things, both small and universe-defining, of their thematic and narrative point, and would turn the fictional universe in question not unrecognizable, but in many respects alien to how it used to be, I think that that creative decision should not be. The gentle viewer can probably guess that my suggestion is turning back from this current direction, as exampled by that Blizzconline 2021 interview answer, and restoring, as I see it, the moral splendor of the Warcraft universe. As I hope I've demonstrated, or at least respectably argued, the narrative, thematic, creative consequences of not doing so are, I think it's justified to say, calamitous. Of course, I say similar things about the topic of each episode of this series. I mean it each time, of course. But by far, as I've said, perhaps to the point of annoyance, of all the topics discussed in this series, this is the one I feel the strongest about. Because out of all these episodes and topics and sections, this is the only point of criticism about the direction of contemporary Warcraft lore I have, which I think is insuperable. By which I mean, I think Warcraft can endure, as I see them, a certain looseness of canon, or the Chronicle series remaining relegated to fake news, or an excess of unreliable narrator. I think each of these impoverishes our beloved fantasy universe, but I don't think any of them, individually or even collectively, essentially harm it. But this is not the case for this proposed creative decision. I qualify all that, as I am wont to do where I think it is called for, with I think, and such like expressions. This is because, as stated, art is subjective. I do not doubt that there are people out there for whom the horror scenarios I have described in this video sound lit, and even an improvement on what came before. But all the same, I am similarly confident that, although people's precise feelings on this matter can and do vary, the topic itself, Warcraft's cosmic morality, is one which lore fans, in general, in different ways and to different degrees, directly or indirectly, care about. And similarly, I also know I am not unique in loving Warcraft's heroic, moral character. And that is why I believe this video has interest outside of purely expressing my, Orthomar's, personal and individual thoughts on the matter. Some might, quite justifiably, ask whether raising this big a fuss is called for when, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the episode, it is not even certain that this is what the original interview statement means. My answer to that is that, one, even if my interpretation is correct and our boy was only referring to the powers themselves, not the creatures associated with them, that would still leave half the problem unsolved, as it were, because the cosmos' makeup would still be, in a word, evil. And two, as I cited, the narrative team very much seems to have moved in a direction where long-established forces of good like the Titans or the Naaru are, to a significant extent at least, sinister and antagonistic. So therefore, I believe this video and its heavy tone are warranted. Preemptively, if nothing else. I also want to add that I am not arguing here against the relatively newfangled idea of these six forces and their respective beings as wanting to advance their agenda in general. I even actually like the idea that, say, the Titans' idea of the ideal state of things is not exactly the same as the Naaru's, and the Naaru's idea is different from the Eternal One's, and so on. What I am up in arms about here is the idea that they only care about that singular agenda, all else be damned. Now, much as in the What Would I Change section of episode 1, I imagine a possible source of hesitation for the narrative team could be that they feel that they've already committed to this cause, if they indeed have, and therefore they can't walk it back in a way that is narratively elegant. And like in episode 1, I would argue that they can. And indeed, given how almost all of the stuff explicitly alluding to all this has been in out-of-universe stuff, like in interviews, for example, as opposed to WoW or in books, for example. I don't think any potential reversal of course could be that disruptive or noticeable from the perspective of, say, WoW. And I would say that any reversal of this particular direction could not be as disruptive as the direction itself, as per the arguments I have presented in this video. What is more, I would, as in other episodes, say that if the narrative team were to agree that this retcon is an issue, then narrative elegance should be secondary to doing what the narrative team thinks to be right creatively for Warcraft. Also, like I quip in section 6 of episode 1, I say that retconning a few years of lore is preferable to retconning 2 decades of lore. However, amidst all this, having just spent over 40 minutes talking about how calamitous I think the story and lore future of Warcraft may be, I believe there is cause for newfound hope, of all things, which is very thematically appropriate for Warcraft. What I mean is, I believe that the narrative team may be aiming to make these cosmic forces not all evil, but all, to quote Anduin in the Temple of the White Tiger, essentially good, and fallible but healthy and constructive parts of the universe. I realize what a bizarre thing that is to say after everything I've said in this video so far, so let me explain. I believe this is possible, owing in part to reasons I mentioned near the beginning of this video. Even in modern Warcraft, in Shadowlands and beyond, even in content that post-dates that interview statement, we see such cosmic beings as acting with unambiguous morality. The Eternal Ones condemned Zoval's immorality and fought against him, even as he sought to, almost successfully, make death dominant overall in the universe. The prototype Pantheon dungeon journal entry, as stated, affirms that the Eternal Ones are capable of mercy and compassion, more than just their base directives. Aralon, a creature of death, struggled with the moral quandary of what to do with Ursoc's spirits and the anima droughts. But there's other examples besides the ones I already mentioned at the beginning. Like how Elune, Mother Moon, part of the pantheon of life, weeps for and loves her favoured children, the Night Elves, and so clearly cares about more than just advancing the agenda of life. I was very pleasantly surprised to see the Dragonflight expansion art book also continue to use the quotes from Christie Golden's 2011 novel Thrall, Twilight of the Aspects, which shows the Titans blessing the Aspects, written back when the Titans were still unambiguously good. So they have things like Aeonar blessing Alexstrasza with compassion for all living things, or Khaz'goroth telling Neltharion how true strength comes from within oneself, and that sort of thing. And yet they kept them, verbatim, in the art book. And one can't even chalk this up to the art book not having caught up with the rest of the lore, as odd an argument as I think that would be, because it's certainly written from a modern angle, like how it refers to the Titans not just as the Pantheon, but as the Pantheon of Order, for example. The writers, for whatever reason, wanted to include the quotes showing the Titans in a positive, noble light. Although I've strongly criticized this retcon otherwise, like in this series, for instance, the Black Empire, it seems, a civilization, well, ruled over by old gods, and so very much capital S shadow affiliated, may have had good to it as well, as those new lore booklets in Uldaman would seem to suggest. And so on. But as the capstone to my argument, as I already mentioned at the start, that one oracle, Sejura, in Zereth Mortis, makes a reference to the six forces and states that they are all necessary and serve a beneficial purpose for the cosmos. And crucially, they also imply that these six need to be brought to harmony.
Six voices in discord. Without harmony, the anthem will be ended.
Lore books in Zereth Mortis also allude to this. I think that it is very possible that this is the narrative team quite plainly foreshadowing the fact that the goal, so to say, is not to defeat and cast away from Azeroth and the cosmos some or all of these forces, but rather to bring them to dwell, as said, in harmony. If the Warcraft universe has any one overarching theme, I would say that it is conflict. By conflict, I do not mean violence, though certainly we have no shortage of that. I mean contrast, dichotomy, diversity, plurality, difference. The very beginning of Volume 2 of the Chronicle states this explicitly. This conflict is expressed in many ways. Violent conflicts between opposed persons, sure, but also thematic conflict and diversity and dichotomy. Warcraft has once sought letters in a magical postmaster's office, and also tread on a path paved with the bones of genocide victims. It has organizations of noble mystics who seek to serve and steward the world's very elements, and quislings who trick their people into damnation for their own self-aggrandizement. It has fantastically prosperous and powerful empires, and people plunged into poverty and outright homelessness owing to the economic costs of a recent military campaign. It has places where people labor to achieve existential peace, and rowdy taverns. And there is also narrative diversity and difference, conflict. There exist one-off stories of making one Galgar's famous cactus apple surprise, and lore tomes depicting eons of history. Sometimes stories told through intentionally opaque whispers from mysterious creatures, and sometimes a character forthrightly explains the situation. Some stories are told over real-life decades, and others are begun and wrapped up in a single side quest line. Some are told in novels, others via audio dramas. And the visual and auditory diversity. Warcraft has places that look like this, and places that look like this. Places that look like this, and places that look like this. Music that sounds like this. And music that sounds like this. Characters that look like this. And characters that look like this. Swords that look like this. And swords that look like this. I'd love to go on, but I think the gentle viewer gets the point. And you know, as some viewers may surmise, I have picked the background scenes for all these episodes in this series very deliberately to fit the theme of each section. And so it is here. This is the banner from Deliverance Point on the Broken Shore, showing off the crests of each class order. Paladins and shaman and rogues and death knights and mages and so on. Quite the eclectic bunch. Even we, the players, the champions of Azeroth, the protagonists of reality, reflect this diversity. I say all this because if the narrative team has decided, or will decide to, move in a direction where all these 6 constituent parts of the cosmos are all capable of good and bad, but are all essentially good. That is to say, the same dynamic as seen most prominently with the Alliance and the Horde, then it could be argued that this dynamic, this contrast between 6 different but equally valuable outlooks on life and the world, serves this foundational aspect of Warcraft: diversity, plurality, dichotomy, difference, conflict, better than them being more clearly cut right and wrong as has existed hitherto. Now, I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't be ecstatic if we just went back to how things used to be. But all the same, when it comes to my suggestions for the narrative team for the future, I would say that this possibility should be taken seriously by lore fans and the narrative team alike. And if all this is so, and is indeed what the narrative team is aiming for or will aim for, then what is to come may be not worse than what has been, or as good as what has been, but better. I know I say at the start of episode 1 how you don't have to watch these videos in numerical order or anything, and I meant it, but this sort of epilogue has to go somewhere, so might as well be here. Obviously, I would rather that I did not have cause to make this series, but given that I feel like I do, it has been a pleasure making it. I've been mulling over thoughts of this sort for about 3 years now, light save me, so actually sitting down and transferring them into an organized public format where they have even the chance of reaching the broader community, and I solely hope the developers, feels really nice. Of course, and like I say at the introduction in episode 1, the number one goal is not even to be a factor in effecting change, but just to publicly express my thoughts and feelings on recent Warcraft lore. Even if nothing and no one's opinion changes, and I end up on some freaking WoW cringe compilation episode 438 or something. Ultimately, I am here first and foremost to express myself, and that is now accomplished. Like I also say in episode 1, I adore the Warcraft universe, as astute viewers of this series may deduce. And I also, despite the existence of this series, and as I also hope I make clear throughout it, have great faith in the modern narrative team. I'm not going to burden the gentle viewer with another one of my exemplary lists, but things like Uther's story in Shadowlands, or the Thrall Jaina conversation in that one BFA cinematic, or the scope and grandeur of the Shadowlands main story, or Emberthal in Dragonflight, and so on. Like I said, I'm not crushing the gentle viewer under another list of mine, but my point is, when I say that I have great faith in and hope in the current narrative team, I am not just trying to be polite. I mean it. The perceived missteps I have expounded on in these videos do not change that. Now, if the gentle viewer for some reason wants to watch yet another episode of this sort of thing, at some point in the not far future, I also mean to make an appendix episode to this series, discussing the first ones and the Titans. I'm not including it in this main series because I don't think that matter is as grave, so to say, but it's still a topic that I also want to discuss. No ETA on that, but stay tuned. Almost assuredly this year, though. That is about it. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Light be with you.